Learn how to make these 2 easy foam board props as well as the balloon garland for your next school-themed event. I'm making a giant piece of notebook paper from this 40 by 60 piece of foam board, though you could make this any size you like. To make the lines for this piece of paper, measure from the bottom of your piece of foam board and make a mark using either a pencil or a marker that's smaller than your tape every 4 inches until you have 12 marks on both the left and right side of your board. I'm using 1/8 inch pinstriping tape to create all of my lines. Sometimes this is called whiteboard tape, but it's basically really thin masking tape and comes in a wide variety of colors. I'll link the tape as well as all the supplies I'm using in today's project in the video description. I'll be using the light blue and red out of this set of tape to make all of the lines. Press the end of the tape into the first mark we made at the bottom of the foam board. Hold the end in place with one finger and gently pull on the tape straight across the board, and then hover the tape over the same mark on the opposite side of the board until the tape is aligned. Gently press it down on top of the mark, and then I like to run my fingers down the entire length of the tape to make sure it's adhered to the board. Leave a little extra tape extending off the end of the board and rip it free. Then repeat until you have all 12 lines adhered to the foam board. Trim the ends of each piece of tape so that they're flush with the foam board using a craft knife. Make the left margin of the paper by measuring 6 inches in from the left-hand side and then applying the red tape from that top mark to the bottom one, pulling gentle tension so the line is nice and straight. I ran my fingers over the tape starting in the center of the board and pushing it out towards the ends before trimming off the excess tape with my craft knife, completing this oversized piece of notebook paper. You can leave the paper blank or apply a custom message for your event. I'll be using vinyl that I sized to this board, but you could always use a giant paint pen to hand draw on a message. My penmanship is atrocious, so I'll be using vinyl. To center the vinyl letters on the first try, I'm going to measure from the right-hand side of the board to that red left margin, as I want the letters to be centered in this space. That's about 17 inches, and I'm going to make a very faint pencil mark right above that blue line. I'll line this with a mark I've made on the transfer tape of my vinyl letters to guide their placement. Once I'm happy with where they're sitting, I'm going to gently rub each of the vinyl letters, trying to not apply any pressure to the transfer tape. It's critical to use low-tack transfer tape when applying vinyl directly onto foam board, as if it's too tacky, we can actually rip the top paper layer off of the foam board. To prevent this, there's a few things you can do. First, you can choose a really low-tack transfer tape, or you can remove the paper backing and then stick it to your shirt a couple times, adding just a little bit of lint to the transfer tape, making it less sticky. It also helps to only rub on the vinyl letters and not apply any extra pressure to the transfer tape. Finally, by pulling the transfer tape off at a steep angle instead of pulling directly up, will also help prevent ripping of the foam board. Once the custom messaging is in place, we can now attach our foam board to some stands so it can freestand and support our balloon garland in a later step. I'm using 2 IKEA lampstands that are a little shorter than 5 feet so they fit behind the foam board, and place them about 6 inches in from each side of the board. Tape the stands to the board using some clear packing tape. I placed one piece of tape near the top of the stand and one near the base. This will give the board 4 connection points and will be more than enough to support this inside design. I turn the board around and put it in its final setting place. Then I'm going to flank it with a 7-foot arch in a blue slipcover. The arch will give us some added height as well as some visual weight with this large blue area. Next, I'm going to make a balloon garland from clusters of 6 balloons. Start by inflating a 17-inch and 11-inch balloon at the same time to a variety of sizes. Gently press them against the table while letting a little bit of air out to make them nice and round, and then tie them into a pair by wrapping the nozzle around twice and tying them in a knot. Make another pair from 2 11-inch balloons, inflating these anywhere between 5 and 8 inches in diameter. Round them off on a table or against your torso and then tie these into a pair as well. Make a second pair from all 11-inch balloons, and then we can join these 3 pairs together into our cluster of 6. Take 2 of your pairs and overlap them so that the nozzles touch in the center, and then twist one balloon from each of those pairs around each other, locking them into a quad. Slip the third pair in against the nozzles of the quad so that they're all touching, and then twist one balloon from this new pair around one of the balloons that's already in the quad, and that will secure all 6 balloons into our cluster. I made another cluster of 6 using only 11-inch balloons and inflated them anywhere between 5 and 9 inches in diameter. It's helpful to have several balloons that are on the smaller side so that our clusters nestle tightly together when we tie them into a garland. I repeated these steps until I had a couple 17-inch clusters and a couple all 11-inch clusters in each of my 5 colors. I'm going to tie my clusters together using an empty 260 balloon. Tie Tie the end of that 260 to the nozzles of an all 11-inch balloon cluster. Nestle a 17-inch cluster against the first one in the same color, then pull the 260 up through the center of this new cluster and wrap it in a figure 8 pattern around 2 of the balloons to secure the 2 together in the start of our garland. I'm going to switch colors and add on another all 11-inch cluster followed by a 17-inch cluster in the same color. This will give my garland a beautiful color-blocked look. As I'm tying on the 17-inch clusters, I'm rotating them around so that the 17-inch balloons end up on different sides of the garland for a nice organic look. At some point, you'll reach the end of the current 260 string that you're using to tie balloons together. Simply take another empty 260 and tie it onto the end to extend that string. I'm going to continue tying on clusters until I have a color block from each of my 5 colors, and then I'll take any remaining 260 tail and tie it to the nozzles of that final cluster so that everything stays nice and secure. At this point, the garland is about 10 feet long, and I'll use this to wrap around the giant piece of notebook paper. By winding the garland around these 2 backdrop pieces, it'll unite all of the pieces together and your eye will visually follow it across the entire design. I'm going to secure the garland to the back of the notebook paper by taping an empty 260 balloon to the top right corner as well as the lower right hand side using some clear packing tape. Now for some added security, I'm going to use the H method and put 2 extra pieces of clear tape over the ends of my first piece of tape so this 260 isn't coming off the back of the board. You could tie the ends of the 260 together to create a loop, but I prefer to leave mine long so I can stretch the 260 tail around one of the balloons directly behind it and wrap it in a figure 8 pattern around a couple of the balloons to secure it in place. I secured the bottom of the garland in the exact same way before pausing and taking a moment to arrange the balloons in my garland. I want to make sure the blue ones at the very bottom are sitting in front of that piece of paper, and I want to rotate the upper part of this garland so this 17-inch balloon is sitting on top instead of tucked behind the backdrops. While adjusting balloons, I'm paying attention to the overall shape of the garland as I want it to smoothly wind its way around and finish resting just on top of the blue arch. I attached the end of the garland to the arch using a binder clip. I clamped it onto the frame and then tied an empty 260 balloon through the handles of that clip. Then take the ends of that 260 balloon and wrap it around some of those green balloons at the end of the garland to secure the 2 together. After stepping back and looking at the design, I decided I needed one more balloon cluster on the end of this garland, so I'm going to use that 260 tail to tie on one more all 11-inch cluster. If I were following the same color pattern, blue would have been the next balloon color to add, but because I'm right on top of this dark blue arch, I decided to go with yellow, which is the next color in the scheme, and skip over the blue so I didn't have blue on blue right here at the top of my garland. To give the garland a little bit more visual interest, I created these mini clusters from 5-inch balloons inflated to 4 inches in diameter and then tied them into quads. Now I'm going to tie 2 of these quads together with an empty 260 balloon that I've cut in half. I'm going to tie 1 quad to each end of that 260. To attach the mini clusters to the garland, stretch the 260 tight and wrap it around one of the balloons in the garland so the 260 is touching the nozzles of that balloon and it'll be hidden from sight. Then you can play around with the placement of those small balloons until you like where they're sitting. You can either place them side by side for a larger textural interest, or you can spread them apart so you have more coverage. These are great for adding texture, visual interest, and defining the shape of the garland. I made another garland in the exact same way using only 3 colors to flank the left-hand side of this design. By repeating an element, it'll give our design some continuity and make a visually interesting backdrop for another foam board prop. This school bus is 40 inches tall by 60 inches long and made from a single piece of foam board of the same size. I've got a printable template, including vinyl SVG cut files for all the lettering, available in the description box below if you'd like to make a school bus as well. I used a craft knife to cut the foam board following the template and spray painted all the pieces, including all the accessories like bumpers and wheels, before hot gluing the entire thing together and applying the vinyl lettering. Support flaps are included if you want this to be a freestanding prop that kids can get behind and take pictures through, or you can nestle it into a backdrop design like I'm doing here. I couldn't resist finishing off this design with a few inflatable pencils. The ones I'm using have these little flaps with holes in them if you wanted to tie your pencils into the design, but because mine is going to be inside, I'm just going to use a couple glue dashes to secure them in place. To attach these, I'm going to hold the pencil about where I want them, and then anywhere the pencil touches a balloon, I'm going to place a glue dash there and adhere the 2 together. I found that 1 or 2 glue dashes was more than enough to hold these pencils in place. The final pencil I attached to the fabric backdrop of my arch using a couple safety pins poked through the support flap of the pencil. Each of the elements we use today is cute on its own, but together they make such a fun backdrop for a school-themed event. If you enjoyed this project, check out this video. And until the next time, remember, stay creative, everybody.